Goffman's account of a universal but unnoticed social death suggests an unwitting community between the living and the dead. Unlike the total institution, where the dead are secreted en masse, in the larger social world, ex-persons move from place to place, moving from death to death, wandering where no one knows their name. The relationship that Goffman maps out here between fixity and mobility is also at the heart of Toni Morrison's reflection on marginality and social death in The Bluest Eye. Early in the novel, the narrator Claudia reflects on the fate of the Breedlove family after they have been turned out of their house. Claudia's particular attention is turned to Piccola, who, as a result of violence, has become a case. She writes, she's become a case, a girl who had no place to go. For Claudia, who lives at home with her family, being outdoors is the real terror of life. Morrison writes, there is a difference between being put out and being put outdoors. If you are put out, you can go somewhere else. If you are outdoors, there is no place to go. Outdoors is the end of something, an irrevocable physical fact, defining and complementing our metaphysical condition. Being a minority in both caste and class, we moved about anyway on the hem of life, struggling to consolidate our weaknesses and hang on, or to creep singly into the major folds of the garment. Our peripheral existence, however, was something we had learned to deal with, probably because it was abstract. But the concreteness of being outdoors was another matter, like the difference between the concept of death and being, in fact, dead. Dead doesn't change, and outdoors is here to stay. Filtered through Claudia's fear, as well as her imaginative identification with Piccola, Morrison considers the difference between social marginality, figured as the abstract concept of death, and being outdoors, figured as the concrete fact of death. Now, there's some striking similarities between Goffman's reflection on failure and Morrison's reflection on being outdoors. Both Goffman and Morrison employ death as metaphor, and in both cases, literal death interrupts a treatment of death as figure. In both cases, literal death is both an amplification of the concept of death, defining and complementing our metaphysical condition, and something quite different, something final and concrete that puts an end to metaphor and to concept. Social death is like real death, and it can also kill you, and it can put an end to your participation in the social. Goffman and Morrison seem to agree about the finality of death when it comes. They also agree about the importance of social mobility before it comes. Goffman describes social sorting that keeps ex-persons in circulation. Morrison says, if you're put out, you can go somewhere else. The main difference between these two reflections on social death is that Goffman considers the fate of social failures in relation to a universal experience of failure, whereas Morrison considers outdoors in relation to a widely shared but particular form of social marginality. The we who move about on the hem of the garment in Morrison's passage are a minority in caste and class. Morrison is referring specifically to the fate of the working-class black community that she treats in the novel. Goffman's we in Stigma, as in On Cooling the Mark Out, as in all of his work, is we normals, a group who are not in fact normal, but who nonetheless constitute a majority and are able to function as a universal. Now, in Raising the Dead, Sharon Holland suggests that we might read this passage from The Bluest Eye as a critique of the contemporary concept of marginality, which she sees as inadequate to the material reality of people of color, and particularly of poor black people of color. Although there is a distinction between those who are hanging on to life and those who have fallen outside, the passage considers the vulnerability of caste and class that makes such a fall imminent. Holland writes, to resist outsider status, to come back from the dead, is a monumental existential feat in Morrison's world. There is no full embrace of the margin here, only the chance to struggle against both a killing abstraction and a life in death. Holland reads not only the finality of death or outdoors as killing, she also reads abstraction, the abstraction of the condition before death as a condition of death in life. She suggests that the abstraction of contemporary critical discourse is death-dealing in its non-recognition of the material circumstances of those identified as marginal. She writes, for those beyond the periphery, beyond even a language of the margin, for those literally outdoors and therefore dead to others, there needs to be a theory profound enough to explain such a devastating existence. Goffman's theory of stigma depends on abstraction and also on a concept of widely shared marginality, though these are not exactly Goffman's terms. However, like Morrison, he draws significant distinctions between widely shared forms of stigma and the fate of the stigmatized, the socially dead, and the actually dead. While abstraction might look like the enemy of singularity and embodiment in Goffman's work, he is attentive to the differences between universal and particular forms of stigma, and abstraction is complemented by the traces of particularity in his examples. Abstraction is important for Goffman because it's associated with the possibility of movement throughout his writing. Goffman considers the uses of abstract description explicitly in his 1982 presidential address to the American Sociological Association. This address was called The Interaction Order. In this essay, which is one of Goffman's most extended meditations on method, he considers critiques of microsociology as being insufficiently attentive to social structure. Goffman argues that life in the interaction order is relatively autonomous and that social actors do not simply express transparently the larger social forces that operate in and through them. He considers the way that the main four critical diffuse statuses, age, grade, gender, class, and race, intersect with other kinds of statuses, personal features, and the contingency of a given social scene. And he argues that the constant sorting or processing that takes place in social encounters can serve unexpected ends. Goffman writes, "It is in these processing encounters, then, that the quiet sorting can occur which, as Bourdieu might have it, reproduces the social structure. But that conservative impact is not, analytically speaking, situational. The subjective weighting of a large number of social attributes, whether these attributes are officially relevant or not, and whether they are real or fanciful, provides a microdot of mystification. Covert value given, say, to race can be mitigated by covert value given to other structural variables, class, gender, age, co-membership, sponsorship network, structures which are at best not fully congruent with each other. And structural attributes, overtly or covertly employed, do not mesh fully with personal ones, such as health or vigor, or with properties that have all of their existence in social situations, looks, personality, and the like. What is situational, then, about processing encounters is the evidence they so fully provide of a participant's real or apparent attributes, while at the same time allowing life chances to be determined through an inaccessible weighting of this complex of evidence. Although this arrangement ordinarily allows for the surreptitious consolidation of structural lines, the same arrangement can also serve to loosen them. While such processing encounters may reproduce structural privilege and domination, they don't necessarily do so. That is, for Goffman, what is situational about them. It is the open mesh of personal and structural characteristics and the inaccessible weighting of evidence that offers this possibility of a reshuffling of social roles that maybe is only for a moment, but becomes possible. Goffman's form of description throughout his work moves between the abstract and the concrete. Personal characteristics as well as structural facts appear in particular instances of social interaction, but these scenes are at the same time breathtakingly abstract, and it's this abstraction Goffman, I think, here explicitly argues that creates possibilities for the reshuffling of characteristics and for social mixing. Goffman's replacement of the idea of segregation based on status as living or dead with sifting at the end of On Cooling the Markout suggests a promiscuity that disregards origin and ontology and instead opens a scene. And I think we might think of one such scene as Goffman's Footnotes, where the normal and the stigmatized, persons and ex-persons, the fictional and the real, the living and the dead, rub elbows, and no one is the wiser. Thanks.